Hey guys, tonight we will step into a journey, both gruesome and strange, about one of the most infamous kings in history, Henry VIII. Imagine this torchlight flickering on stone walls, heavy footsteps echoing down a long corridor, and somewhere a man wearing a crown so heavy, yet his secrets were far heavier still. Tonight, we will uncover 101 shocking and bizarre facts about Henry VIII, details that will make you question whether history was truly glorious, or just decay wrapped in velvet. And trust me, if you ever thought kings were all noble and majestic like in fairy tales, then tonight you will barely survive. What's waiting for you? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And what time it is there, I'd really love to know. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes for a moment. And imagine yourself standing before the massive gates of Hampton Court Palace. The dark red bricks under the moonlight seem to exhale a chill, while the scent of dried grass from the vast gardens drifts through every crevice of the wind. You step inside, and immediately, the name Henry VIII echoes in your mind, a king as famous as he was infamous, a figure celebrated by some, whispered about by others with stories far from flattering. The very first thing you will hear about him is the smell. Yes, the stench from the body of one of the most powerful kings in Europe at the time. They said that when Henry entered a room, the odor from the festering ulcers on his legs could arrive several steps before him. Imagine being a minor court official, notebook in hand, forced to stand for hours before the throne, while the reek of rotting flesh rolled out like waves. Everyone had to keep a face as calm as if they were inhaling lavender. A single grimace could cost you your head. You see, serving at the Tudor court was like competing in a game show called Who Can Endure the Stench the Longest. The historical fact is that Henry VIII was tormented by leg ulcers, so severe they became one of his defining features in his Tudor later years. Royal physicians even used red-hot irons to lance the wounds, hoping to drain the pus and cleanse them. The strange detail few know is that Henry regarded those agonizing treatments as a kind of sacred purification. He believed God was testing him. Hearing this, you might feel lucky to live now, when even a toothache comes with dentists and anesthesia. Back then, there was only fire and screams piercing the night. Historians still debate how much those ulcers shaped Henry's character. Some argue the constant pain transformed him from a charming prince into a furious tyrant. Others believe the cruelty was always there, and illness simply stripped away the mask. It's like when hunger makes you irritable. Only Henry was hungry for comfort for years on end. You step further into the Great Hall, where banquets once unfolded in unbelievable excess. Henry could eat enough for an entire football team, and I am not exaggerating. Roast swan, stuffed turkey, eggs, cheese, pastries, and above all, rivers of wine. On some occasions, he gorged himself until he vomited right at the table, then resumed eating as if nothing had happened. Picture this: the entire court watching as the king, flushed and sweating, gnawed at a bloody roast, while the sound of retching filled a golden bowl. It was like a grotesque version of a spicy noodle challenge, except the audience was required to applaud. Official records state that by the end of his life, Henry VIII weighed more than 400 pounds. He was too heavy to mount a horse, and had to be hoisted up with a system of pulleys designed specifically for him. And here's a bizarre little fact. Even the palace doors had to be widened to fit his bulk. Imagine today if the CEO of a giant company was so large that the elevators had to be rebuilt just for him. It would be a running joke online. But in the 16th century, no one dared laugh. Or if they did, They vanished soon after. Scholars still argue, did Henry truly eat himself to death? Some say diabetes, combined with injuries from jousting and his obesity, was the real cause of his decline. But all agree Henry turned himself into a living mountain of flesh in his final years. So much so that people compared his fall from a horse to the collapse of a building. Take a deep breath, luckily. It's only the cool breeze of the present. Back in 1540, you would have inhaled Henry's breath. Described as a medieval biological weapon. Rotterdam's ulcerated tongue. The sickly sweetness of diabetes mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Those who had to speak to him often tried to stand downwind. It's fair to say Henry didn't need bodyguards. A single breath could make an enemy surrender. Isn't it ironic that the man once hailed as the perfect prince ended up remembered for his mouth odor within the palace? There was a peculiar group called the Grooms of the Stool, the men tasked with the most intimate of duties, attending to the king's toilet. Put bluntly, wiping Henry's backside. Strange as it sounds, it was actually one of the most powerful positions at court, because those closest to the royal body were also closest to the royal ear. But honestly, would you trade your political career just to endure Henry's stench every day? This grotesque reality only deepened the contradictions of his image, a man hailed as chosen by God, yet so bloated he needed others to clean him. Historians still debate whether these attendants were truly loyal or merely endured the ordeal for influence. Some records note that new servants often vomited on their first day. To quit the job, however, meant betrayal and likely execution. You see, serving as staff for Henry VIII was worse than working under the harshest startup boss. And then, of course, there is the infamous matter of his love life. 6 wives. It sounds like the cast of a reality show. But unlike television, there were no happy endings. Some were divorced. Some executed. Some died young in childbirth. There's even a grim rhyme every British schoolchild learns: divorced. Beheaded. Died. Divorced. Beheaded. Survived. It sounds like the tagline for a dark comedy. But in reality, it was the tragic fate of 6 unfortunate women. With Catherine of Aragon, a love that lasted more than 2 decades, ended in brutal abandonment. Henry declared the marriage had never existed, turning their daughter Mary into a bastard. Historians still debate, was Catherine actually poisoned in her final days, since her death came at such a convenient time for Henry. As for Anne Boleyn, the woman famed for her wit and sharpness, Henry staged an entire sham trial to send her to the executioner's block. Even her brother was dragged into that cruel performance. You might chuckle bitterly when you hear that just one day after Anne's execution, Henry was engaged to Jane Seymour. Yes, the blood was barely dry before the wedding dress was ready. If social media had existed back then, Twitter would have exploded with the hashtag number too soon. Do you see the pattern? In every breath, every step, every decision, Henry VIII left behind traces of excess of power, excess of presence, excess even in the flaws of his own body. From a dashing young prince, he turned into a diseased obesity, still draped in the cloak of being sacred and chosen by God. You might ask yourself perhaps what truly rotted was not only Henry's legs, but the very soul and dynasty he built. And then you smile faintly, because it feels familiar, even today. There are people who flaunt power and shine in public, while inside they are nothing more than a festering secret. You take a deep breath, the fan sending a soft breeze against your ear, and in that moment you feel relief, knowing you never had to sit at Henry's table, listening to him belch through the great hall, pretending that the stench rolling off his body was nothing. You only need to lie down, letting this story slowly lull you into sleep. You rest still, hearing the steady hum of the fan like the gentle tapping of time, and we once again wander through the dark corridors of history to meet Henry VIII one more time. This king was not only a symbol of power and lust, but also living proof that history is never as fragrant as the textbooks make it seem. Let's start with a detail that still makes modern jaws drop Henry VIII's armor. In the Tower of London, his suits of steel are still on display. And the fascinating and somewhat frightening thing is that you can trace his weight gain through metal, from the slim 32-inch waist of a 17-year-old youth to the more than 60-inch belly of his later years. It is all recorded in iron. Imagine scrolling through someone's old Facebook albums, six-pack abs in the early photos, a beer belly spiraling out of control later on. The only difference is that Henry had no ha-ha reacts. Everyone had to bow to the mountain of flesh with a sword. The official record by the end of his life. Henry was so obese and heavy that a mechanical pulley system was required to hoist him onto his horse. Specially bred horses were chosen solely to withstand the weight of the king. And here's a strange fact few mention when foreign envoys visited. The sight of Henry being crane-lifted onto a horse had to be kept secret. If revealed, it would have been a national humiliation. Imagine a king dangling like a sack of grain before riding into battle, hardly the majestic image the portrait suggested. Historians still argue whether the powerful, athletic prince image of young Henry was reality or propaganda. Some sources claim he was skilled at sports, jousting like a champion, playing tennis like a nobleman. But many diplomatic accounts describe him as lazy, preferring to eat and watch others compete rather than take part himself. Perhaps the perfect prince image was simply clever PR. Like an Instagram feed, filtered to perfection. You sigh, then chuckle again. In the 21st century, no one is shocked when a football star or actor photoshops away a beer belly. Henry VIII had an entire team of portrait painters who slimmed the waistline for him. Proof that filters existed long before smartphones. The brush was just the original app. Now tilt your ear toward the Tudor corridors and listen to the whispers stories of codpieces, the padded bulges sewn onto men's clothing of the time. Henry was infamous for enlarging his codpiece to grotesque proportions, as if the whole of Europe needed reminding of his manhood. A strange, rarely noted fact, the weaker his real body became from illness and impotence, the larger his codpiece grew. Some envoys compared it to a jeweled watermelon. Others called it a velvet mace. You laugh. Don't you truly? Compensating is nothing new. Henry lost virility but flaunted padding. In today's world, he would be a VIP client for underwear ads. Scholars still debate the disease that weakened Henry. Some suggest syphilis, others chronic infections from wounds or diabetes. But one fact is undeniable. He used clothing to disguise and even weaponize his shame. Forcing others to pretend to believe in his strength was itself a psychological victory. You shiver at the thought of Tudor council meetings. Picture a hall full of nobles, cholas, and ambassadors, dutifully writing notes, while in front of them sits a king whose breath wilted flowers, whose garments dripped with grease, and whose codpiece ballooned like a swaying ball, and everyone had to sit there in solemn silence, as though attending a concert. Truly, it was a workplace more stressful than any modern video call, at least today. You can switch off your camera. Then there were the intimate details that still make one squirm. Henry grew so obese and helpless that he could no longer clean himself. He needed a staff of grooms of the stool attendants, tasked with wiping him. It sounds absurd. Yet this was a prestigious office, because it meant absolute trust and the chance to whisper in the king's ear. But place yourself in that role. Would you endure such a stench for political advancement? A little-known fact, Many new attendants vomited during their very first duty, but to quit was treason, punishable by death. In the Tudor court, it was easier to face the battlefield than to face the king's private chamber. Historians still debate whether the groom of the stool was truly an honor or simply a form of disguised torture. Perhaps it was both. Power always comes with a terrible price. And here that price was the reek of rot and the constant risk of execution. You lean back, letting the fan draw your soul gently into the present. For a moment, you feel both horrified and amused. Henry VIII, a man of contradictions both heroic and foul. A Disney prince, in painted portraits, yet a living nightmare in old age. And you think to yourself that how fortunate it is that tonight all you need to do is switch on a fan, pull up a blanket, and simply listen. You lie down, hearing the fan's steady whir, like the slow tapping of time. We continue the story of Henry VIII, this time not only about stench, gluttony, or swelling suits of armor, but about the 6 women who entered his life, only to become 6 tragic chapters. 6 names, which at first glance might sound like a glittering list of queens, but in reality, follow the grim refrain: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Let's begin with Catherine of Aragon. She was the first wife, tied to Henry for over 20 years. Imagine that a marriage twice as long as the average lifespan of their era. Catherine was a Spanish princess, bringing both honor and political alliance. Yet when she failed to produce a male heir, she was discarded like an old possession. Henry not only demanded divorce, but declared the marriage had never existed. Their daughter, Princess Mary, was suddenly branded illegitimate. It was not only a betrayal of love, but an assassination of dignity, a strange detail few know even on her deathbed. Catherine wrote to Henry, addressing him as "my dear husband." While Henry had long turned away, she still clung to her faith in their bond. It was the kind of love that draws both sympathy and exasperation. "Oh, Catherine, let go. He never deserved you." Historians still debate, did Catherine die of natural illness? Or was there poison at work? Her death was suspiciously convenient, arriving just as Henry needed to secure his marriage to Anne Boleyn. And so the first tragedy closed in cold silence, with a final letter unanswered. Now we move to Anne Boleyn, the second wife. Sharp, captivating, but victim of one of the most fraudulent trials in history. Imagine from a powerful queen. Within months, she was a prisoner in the Tower of London, facing absurd charges of adultery, even with her own brother. A fabrication designed solely to legalize her death. The historical fact Anne was executed by sword rather than axe. Henry summoned a famed French swordsman, so the act would not descend into mockery. A curious detail: on the very morning of her execution, Anne prayed for Henry's happiness and long life. A gesture of forgiveness so chilling it still raises goosebumps today. Historians continue to debate, was Anne truly plotting politically, or simply a casualty of Henry's ambition? Whatever the truth, the outcome was bitter. Henry was playing tennis when he received news that his wife's head had fallen. If Twitter had existed, surely number priorities would have been trending. Next came Jane Seymour, the third wife, the only one to bear Henry a surviving son, Prince Edward. For that reason, Henry declared her his true love. It sounds romantic, but in truth Jane died soon after childbirth. Henry mourned, wore black, appeared broken. Yet within months he was searching for another bride. A little-known fact: Jane Seymour died from postpartum infection, a condition easily preventable with basic hygiene. But instead of tending to his wife's health, Henry celebrated the long-awaited arrival of a son, even in joy. Henry's selfishness left its mark. Historians still argue, did Henry love Jane? Or simply the result she gave him a male heir? For true love would not neglect a wife in mortal danger to host a celebration. Then came Anne of Cleves, the fourth wife, famous for the portrait deception. Henry chose her based on a flattering painting, but upon meeting declared, "She looks like a Flanders mare." The marriage lasted only a few months, unconsummated, ending in swift annulment. Yet Anne of Cleves emerged as the survivor in this deadly marriage game. She obediently signed the annulment, called Henry her dear brother, and lived comfortably with wealth, untouched by execution. Among the 6 wives, Anne was perhaps the wisest, choosing life over a crown. Historians debate, was Anne terrified into surrender, or shrewd enough to value survival over title? Either way, she proved that retreating at the right moment can be the sharpest survival skill of all. Then came Catherine Howard, the 5th wife, a mere girl of 16 or 17, forced into marriage with an aging, obese, ailing Henry. A true tragedy, a young woman, already scarred by abuse in childhood, delivered into the hands of a tyrant. When her past romances were exposed, Henry raged, branding it betrayal. Catherine was dragged to the scaffold, screaming and begging in terror, in stark contrast to Anne Boleyn's calm dignity. A little-known fact before execution, Catherine asked for one final request to practice laying her head on the block, so she would know how it felt. A wish so haunting it chills the listener even now. Historians still debate, was Catherine entirely a victim, or also a pawn in the political schemes of the Howard family? Either way, the fate of a teenage girl losing her head is enough to stain the Tudor story in tragedy. Finally, Catherine Parr, the 6th wife, and the one who survived. She was intelligent, diplomatic, and mastered the art of flattery to soothe Henry's temper. Once, after debating theology too boldly, she nearly faced arrest. But Catherine quickly apologized, saying she only wished to learn from her husband's divine wisdom. Henry, with his enormous ego, forgave her immediately. It was the art of survival in the hands of a clever woman. An unusual fact, Catherine Parr was the first woman in English history to publish a book under her own name. She quietly left an intellectual legacy while playing the role of the obedient wife before her husband. Historians still debate, did Catherine Parr truly love Henry? Or was she simply playing a careful game of survival? Yet it was precisely her shrewdness that allowed her to be the only wife who lived after Henry's death. You lie still, eyes closed, realizing 6 women, 6 fates, all reflecting one man, Henry VIII. A man who used love as a political tool, turned marriage into a scaffold, and left behind a legacy soaked in tears. And yet, you smile softly. Because history is not only tragedy, but also lessons. Catherine of Aragon showed the strength of patience. Anne Boleyn reminded us of the danger of ambition. Jane Seymour of the cost of sacrifice. Anne of Cleves of the wisdom in retreat. Catherine Howard of the pain of youth exploited. And Catherine Parr of the art of survival in a woman's hands. The fan still turns, and your eyelids grow heavy. The story closes like smoke, leaving only the echo power can shape history. But it is the human beings and their fragile fates that make it memorable. Now imagine this, a January morning in 1536. The sky grey as if warning of doom. Henry VIII, just past 40, still dreamed of proving himself the mighty prince of Europe. He donned shining armor, mounted a war horse, ready for a joust, the sport of Tudor nobility. The entire court watched breathlessly, for this was not mere entertainment, but a performance of power. And then came the fateful fall. The horse reared. Henry was thrown, his heavy body crushed by steel. Witnesses said he lay unconscious for 2 hours, many believing the king was dead. Picture it, one of Europe's most powerful monarchs, lying motionless in the mud, under the horrified eyes of his courtiers. It was not only a physical fall, but the beginning of a collapse in spirit and character. The official record, the fall of 1536, left Henry with severe injuries to head and leg. Modern medical research suggests he suffered traumatic brain injury, leading to drastic changes in mood and personality. It also worsened the ulcers on his legs, chaining him to chronic pain and the stench of decay. A strange coincidence. Few recall just before that accident, Anne Boleyn, his second wife, miscarried. The male heir Henry longed for was lost at the very moment he lay unconscious. Contemporaries saw it as a divine omen. The Tudor line would never secure a lasting son. Imagine the king waking from a coma, realizing his body was broken, while his last hope for an heir had vanished. Enough to turn any man into a tyrant consumed by fear. Historians still debate, did this fall truly transform Henry from Renaissance prince to cold-blooded tyrant? Some argue the cruelty was always there, waiting to emerge. Others point to brain trauma and chronic pain as catalysts for paranoia and rage. Whatever the truth, after 1536, Henry VIII was no longer the man he had been. Remember, before the fall, Henry was celebrated tall, handsome, skilled in music and poetry. Afterward, he grew heavy, brooding, suspicious, quick to fury. With that fall, England lost a bright prince and gained a despot, and tragically, thousands of subjects, loyal courtiers, and wives alike would pay the price for one accident that altered his mind forever. Do you see? Sometimes a single fall from a horse can change the fate of a nation. History has known arrows and bullets that turned wars. For Henry VIII, it was a tumble from the saddle that turned an entire dynasty into a long nightmare. The fall of 1536 left another consequence. Henry began to believe that he was chosen by God to suffer on behalf of mankind. The pain in his legs, the stench of his body, he saw as sacred marks. And from this belief, Henry justified his autocratic actions, including executing wives, killing friends, and slaughtering enemies. You inhale slowly, then exhale. In the dim yellow light, you see a paradox. Clearly, sometimes history does not change through great battles or important treaties. But through the moment a man falls from a horse, you are still lying still, listening to the steady hum of the fan, as I guide you gently into one of the darkest chapters of Tudor history, the final days of Henry VIII. No longer the image of a youthful prince, proudly on horseback and strumming a lute in a great hall. Instead, a heavy, decaying figure sat silently on the throne, like a shadow haunting his own court. Picture this: a chamber in Whitehall Palace, dim candlelight, flickering but failing to banish the smell of decay. It was the odor from the ulcers festering on Henry's legs. People said that just opening the door from afar was enough to make courtiers faint. The royal physicians tried everything, washing the wounds with strong wine, cauterizing with red-hot irons, applying herbal poultices, but all failed. Each day, the sores grew deeper, the flesh rotted further, and pus seeped endlessly. A reminder that the most powerful king in Europe was betrayed by his own body. A strange detail few know: Henry began to believe the pain was a mark from God, that he was like a martyr, suffering on behalf of his nation. Perhaps it was his way of consoling himself, or perhaps a form of delusion, born of long years of illness. Historians still debate, did Henry truly believe in the sacred meaning of his pain? Or was it an excuse to mask helplessness before an incurable disease? Either way, the image of a king screaming while doctors burned his wounds, then arrogantly declaring he was being tested, is both terrifying and grotesque. In his final days, Henry hardly appeared in public. He grew so fat he could only move in a specially made litter, his massive body swallowing the wooden chair. The grand feasts of the past were gone, replaced by private meals, yet still filled with roasted meat, pastries, and wine. Despite doctors' endless warnings, you might imagine a modern diabetic patient stubbornly devouring an entire cake, coughing between bites, with no one daring to stop him. Ironically, Henry still flaunted power. He dressed in jewel-studded clothes, draped himself in furs so heavy that servants had to lift them, yet the splendor only emphasized his failing body. Picture a golden candle, its outside shining, but its wax core melting into rot. The official record in 1547, Henry VIII died at the age of 55. But in the years before, he lived in near-total isolation. Loyal courtiers had died or been executed under his suspicion. 6 wives, 5 gone in blood and tears. His son Edward, still a child. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, branded as bastards in their youth. Around Henry, there was no one left to share his final days. Historians still debate, did Henry realize this loneliness? Some believe he remained deluded, confident that God had chosen him, and the Tudor line was secure. Others argue he knew, deep down, that he had turned love and loyalty into weapons, leaving no one to grieve him sincerely. Listen for the wind outside the window. Just as in Henry's last nights, the wind was his only companion. Doctors could do little but change bandages and burn away dead flesh. They heard his groans, then his shouts for wine and meat. Pain and greed clung together until the end. An unusual detail when Henry died. His body swelled and stank so badly that powerful perfumes were used in vain. The coffin was sealed, but after a few days, under the heat, the wood swelled, split, and fluids leaked onto the chapel floor. Witnesses believed it was a sign of God's punishment. Think about it. A man who feared being disrespected, who tried to prove himself with jewels, mariage, and absolute power in the end became a bloated corpse, too foul for even wood to contain. A kind of historical karma. Historians still debate, did Henry die of heart failure, diabetes, or systemic infection? For the common people, no diagnosis was needed. They only remembered that the king once praised as glorious died foul-smelling, bloated, and alone. Sometimes death does not need gore to become haunting. The stench alone is enough for infamy. You see, from the fall of 1536, Henry VIII was never the same. But it was in his last years that the tragedy erupted, fully a rotting body, a lonely soul, and a dynasty trembling before an uncertain future. His death was not merely the end of a man, but a warning. Absolute power cannot resist the decay of flesh or the emptiness of the heart. And from here, you see, a truth history is not always a heroic song. Sometimes it is only the labored breathing of a bloated king in a dark room, waiting for his final breath. Throughout nearly 38 years of his reign, Henry VIII signed no fewer than thousands of death warrants. Some historians claim the number could reach 50,000. If one includes the beheadings, hangings, and burnings carried out in the name of defending the crown and preserving the faith. Imagine it a wide execution ground. Flags fluttering in the sky, crowds pressing in to watch, and the blade falling to cheers. For to the subjects, such scenes were as familiar as attending a festival. For us, they are nothing less than a recurring nightmare. A strange detail few know: Henry enjoyed feasting immediately after executions. When the blood was still fresh on the scaffold, he could sit in the great hall, raise a goblet of wine, and listen to music. Once, only hours after his second wife, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded. He played tennis, and the very next day became engaged to Jane Seymour. Historians still debate, was Henry truly addicted to blood? Or did he simply see it as a necessary political tool? Some argue his cold-bloodedness came from personality changes after his head injury in 1536. Others believe it was cold calculation, meant to spread terror through the court. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Countless lives ended to satisfy the rage or suspicion of a single man. Imagine working for a boss who one day pats your shoulder with praise, and the next day signs your death warrant. That was life in the Tudor court. Sir Thomas More, a famous scholar, author of Utopia, had once been Henry's close friend and advisor, but simply for refusing to endorse the king's new marriage, he was executed. A little-known fact: Thomas More went to the scaffold smiling, joking, "Help me up, but let me down on my own." A defiant remark in his final moment, in stark contrast to Henry's cold detachment back in the palace. Historians still debate, did Henry truly believe More had betrayed him? Or did he just want to silence dissent? The answer may not matter, for More's death became a symbol in Tudor England. Intellect could not withstand the fury of the king. What people remember most is Henry's willingness to kill even those closest to him. Anne Boleyn, the wife for whom he defied the Pope, lost her head. Catherine Howard, the young bride accused of adultery, was dragged to the block screaming. Anne's brother, George Boleyn, too, was executed on absurd charges of incest, all to justify the king's anger and fickle affections. Imagine a family dinner today, with arguments only over whether the soup is too salty. For Henry, disagreeing could cost you your life. The Tudor dinner table was a battlefield. Historians still debate, did Henry ever feel regret for killing wives or kin? Some sources say he sighed when recalling Jane Seymour, the only wife who died naturally after giving him a son. But most believe Henry grew accustomed to treating people as chess pieces, and when a piece lost its value, he swept it aside. The most terrifying part was not the death toll itself, but the atmosphere over the whole nation. People knew a single misplaced word, a careless whisper, could brand them traitor and send them to the gallows. Monks who rejected the new faith were burned. Nobles, suspected of lacking loyalty, met the axe. Tudor society under Henry was like a vast stage, where everyone had to know their lines, clap at the right time, and hold their breath when the obese king walked by. A strange decree: Henry once ordered executions for people who merely dreamed of being king. Yes, if accused of speaking in your sleep about wearing the crown, you could lose your life. A chilling example of his obsession with power, historians still debate, was the figure of 50,000 exaggerated. Some argue the real number was only several thousand, since Tudor records are incomplete. But whether a few thousand or tens of thousands, the truth is chilling. Henry VIII turned death into a political language, and England into a vast prison. Do you see? From the fall in the year 1536 to the foul and lonely final days, the path Henry VIII walked was drenched in blood and tears. He killed wives, killed friends, killed subjects, killed even those who once loved him, all to secure a throne he could never take with him to the grave. And now, as you lie back and close your eyes, you understand the most chilling truth about Henry VIII was not the stinking ulcers or the bulging armor, but that he turned the deaths of tens of thousands into the foundation of his power. That power lasted a lifetime, but the cries of his victims echo still through history. When Henry VIII breathed his last in January 1547, the English court immediately fell into tension. On one hand, they had to pretend to mourn a great king. On the other, they had to deal with the enormous, rapidly decomposing corpse. Henry's body was too heavy, too swollen, so the coffin had to be specially reinforced. Oak wood, thickly bound, lined with lead, and wrapped in perfumed cloths to mask the smell. But no covering could truly hide the stench of a body, long rotting from within. A strange detail few know on the way to Windsor. The coffin leaked. Under the damp winter heat and the obese body, the wood cracked. Fluids seeped out onto the church floor where the coffin rested. Folktales say stray dogs licked the substance. Witnesses took it as a sign of divine punishment, a reminder that no matter how powerful, the king could not escape corruption. Historians still debate, was the dogs licking the blood story true, or simply rumour to defame Henry after death. But the undeniable fact is that Henry's funeral was far from the solemn grandeur he had dreamed of. It was more like a slow-moving tragedy, with courtiers holding their breath for fear of the smell rising during the rite. Yet Henry VIII was still a king, and the court staged the funeral with royal ritual. Long funeral carriages, horsemen in black cloaks, mourning banners fluttering through the streets. The people knelt along the way, partly in reverence, partly in curiosity. To them, this was the burial of the man who had forever altered England, who severed ties with Rome and founded the Church of England. A strange fact, instead of blessing from the Pope or senior clergy, Henry's funeral was conducted by priests he himself had appointed. It was the court's way of declaring, "This is the king who freed England from Rome." But to many, it looked like one final charade, a king who had used religion as a political weapon, now being praised as God's man. Historians still debate, did the court truly mourn Henry, or merely go through the motions? Some accounts note courtiers with cold faces, dry eyes. The only ones said to have wept were a few widows who had served in the palace, though even that may have been fear rather than love. Henry's body was carried to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, the traditional royal burial place. He was laid next to Jane Seymour, the third wife, the only one to bear him a surviving son. It seems Henry had ordered it so in death. He wanted to lie beside Jane, his so-called true love. It sounds romantic, but remember, Jane Seymour died in childbirth, and the very next day, Henry was already discussing remarriage. Perhaps this proves that memory can be more romantic than reality. Another little-known fact, Henry VIII's tomb has never been completed as planned. He once dreamed of a grand monument to rival Europe's greatest rulers, but the treasury was empty, and later monarchs had little interest in glorifying him. So Henry, who in life had demanded palace doors be widened for his body in death, lay in a simple grave, modest enough to surprise modern visitors. Historians still debate, was this deliberate neglect or mere chance? Some argue the court wanted Henry to fade from memory, leaving behind too many stains. Others say England was simply too turbulent afterward for anyone to care about building a grand tomb. Do you see? Even in death, Henry VIII could not claim full majesty. His funeral was grand, yet foul-smelling. His tomb exists, but never as great as he desired. And his name, whether praised or cursed, remains bound to contradiction, a life drenched in power and blood, and a death of stench and solitude. It is a reminder to you, and to anyone listening to this story, that power, gold, and thrones cannot hide the truth. We all return to dust, and history remembers only the shadow we leave behind. Try to imagine, for decades before his death, Henry had been the symbol of youth and strength. A handsome prince, tall, riding horses like the wind, writing music, playing instruments. The people believed they had a perfect king. Yet when his coffin rolled toward Windsor, the crowd looked on with eyes mixed with curiosity and coldness. Official record, Henry's funeral lasted for many days, with hundreds of knights and banner-bearing soldiers in escort. Windsor Castle was draped in black. Funeral music filled the air. The procession was grand, but the true emotion was emptiness. For while Henry had created the Church of England, signed treaties, and won battles, in the memory of the people, he was still the man who had killed too many from loyal nobles to his own wives. A strange detail few know many among the people did not mourn, but whispered that this was a deserved death. While the court worked to paint the image of a great king, outside, the people passed around tales of the coffin's stench, seeing it as the price paid by a tyrant. Historians still debate was Henry VIII loved at the end of his life. Some argue many still respected him for breaking England free of papal control. Others insist that respect was nothing more than fear in disguise. Henry once dreamed of a splendid tomb, with sculptures and gilded ceilings to rival the emperors of Europe. Yet when he died, England was exhausted by war and extravagance. The treasury was empty. The court had no money to build his monument, and so Henry was buried in a temporary grave beside Jane Seymour. That grave remains simple, almost forgotten. To this day, think of it, a man who had eaten so much he needed pulleys to lift him on a horse, who spent fortunes on feasts, who draped himself in gold and fur, in the end lay in a plain pit. That is the paradox of power. The more in life, the less in death. A curious fact in his will, Henry asked for a choir to sing prayers for his soul every day, forever. But within a few years, those prayers were cut short for lack of funds. Even music for the soul could not withstand the harsh reality of a bankrupt kingdom. Historians still debate, was this simplicity an insult, or a fair punishment history dealt him? But one truth is clear: Henry's funeral, though outwardly grand, could not hide the reality of a poor and hollow ending. Henry's funeral not only closed a life, but opened storms of politics. His son, Edward, took the throne at just 9 years old, a frail, sickly boy. His daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, still carried the stigma of bastardy, branded by Henry himself. And so the country entered an age of turmoil, fierce religious reforms, new executions, and finally the rise of Elizabeth I. Picture the nobles standing at the funeral, secretly thinking, who holds true power now? The funeral was not only a farewell, but a political stage. Every nod, every bow during the morning bore the weight of alliances for the years to come. Little known fact, during those funeral days, many nobles secretly wrote letters abroad, announcing Henry's death to strike deals with foreign powers. The funeral was a theatre of two faces mourning outside, scheming within. Historians still debate, did Henry foresee this when he wrote his will? He left a list of guardians for Edward, but that list quickly became a blood-stained contest for power. Perhaps Henry's death was not only the end of a man, but the beginning of decades of chaos. Do you see Henry VIII's funeral was like a play of contradictions, grand yet hollow, lavish yet rotten, mournful yet calculating, and from that stage, English history entered a new chapter where Henry's legacy was not light, but cracks within both family and realm. And you, lying here listening, may smile bitterly. The greatest power, the greatest wealth, in the end, cannot defeat time. What remains is only a noisy funeral, a leaking coffin, and a kingdom still trembling after the toll of its king's passing bell. According to Henry VIII's will, the crown passed to his son Edward, the only surviving boy born of Jane Seymour. When Henry died, Edward was just 9, a thin, pale child who coughed and sickened easily. Imagine a modern schoolboy, still memorizing multiplication tables, suddenly crowned king of a nation. It sounds grand, but in truth, everyone knew the real power was not in his hands. Official record, Edward VI was crowned on January 28th, 1547. only hours after his father's death. The court staged a splendid coronation to hide the fact that the realm was in danger. For how could a 9-year-old boy face political schemes and the wolves of Europe circling at the gates? A strange fact few people know: Edward, though very young, was remarkably intelligent and quickly fell under the influence of Protestant tutors. The boy preferred reading the Bible to playing and was often called the godly child. But, as you know, the Tudor court was never an easy place for the innocent. Historians still debate would Edward have truly been capable of ruling had he lived longer. Some scholars believe he had the potential to push through sweeping religious reforms. Others argue that his frail health would always have curtailed any ambitions. So who held power while Edward was too young? The answer lies in the Regency Council, established by Henry in his will. Yet, only days after the funeral, it was clear this was no council of cooperation, but a battlefield. Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, the boy king's uncle, quickly seized absolute control. He styled himself Lord Protector. To the people, he was the uncrowned king. For although Edward VI sat on the throne, all real decisions came from Seymour. Official record: Seymour held power from 1547 to 1549. In those 2 years, he advanced Protestant reforms, continuing what Henry VIII had begun. He ordered the removal of sacred images, dissolved remaining monasteries, and turned churches into places of English preaching instead of Latin. Little-known detail: Seymour also sought to elevate himself to the rank of emperor. He commissioned a new palace so lavish that the people mocked it as the castle of a madman. That extravagance stirred resentment among nobles, who quietly plotted his downfall. Historians still debate, was Seymour truly a reformer, or simply exploiting his regency to aggrandize himself? Supporters argue he alone was strong enough to steady the realm. Critics claim he was no different from Henry VIII in greed, just without the 60-inch waistline. While Seymour busied himself with reforms and display, the people suffered. The new religious policies stripped villages of their familiar churches and rites. Rebellions flared, the greatest in the West Country in 1549, where people rose against the imposition of English in worship instead of Latin. To them, it was an insult to their faith. Official record: this uprising is known as the Prayer Book Rebellion. It was crushed with bloodshed. Thousands of rebels were slaughtered by royal troops, leaving a dark stain on Seymour's regency. A curious fact: while people died in their thousands, Seymour stubbornly defended his policy. That cost him the support of many nobles, who eventually united to overthrow him. Historians still debate, was Seymour truly cruel, or did he simply have no other choice? Some argue that had he been softer, England's Reformation would have slowed. Yet the outcome is undeniable. He fell from power and was executed. After Seymour's fall, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, emerged as the true power. He did not call himself Lord Protector, as Seymour had, but in reality, he directed everything behind the throne. Dudley was more ambitious, more ruthless, and ready to do whatever it took to keep control. Official record: Dudley arranged for his son to marry Lady Jane Grey, granddaughter of Henry VIII, laying the groundwork to seize the crown. Strange detail: Lady Jane Grey later became the 9 Days Queen, one of the most tragic figures in English history. And the roots of her story lay in John Dudley's ambition during Edward's reign. Historians still debate, did Dudley believe he was acting in England's best interest? Or was he merely opportunistic? Either way, he left his mark as one of the most ambitious statesmen after Henry VIII. And Edward VI. He grew up in the midst of these power struggles, knowing little beyond scripture, study, and the whispers that he was God's chosen. But his frail body betrayed him. Just 6 years after taking the crown, in 1553, Edward died at only 15, likely from tuberculosis or a lung infection. Imagine it a kingdom that had placed all its hopes in a boy, only to lose him before he became a man. That death opened the way to new struggles for the throne, to the tragedy of Lady Jane Grey, and to the fiery return of Mary I, daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Historians still debate if Edward had lived longer. Could he have firmly established the Church of England and prevented the persecutions of Mary I? Some optimists believe Edward might have become the great reforming king. But the truth is, history remembers him only as a frail boy who died young, leaving behind a throne in chaos. You see, after the death of Henry VIII, England did not enter peace, but fell into a whirlpool of power struggles. A 9-year-old child became king. His guardians schemed, betrayed, and fell one after another. Henry's funeral closed, but the Tudor nightmare opened wider decades, more of turmoil. And as you close your eyes, listening to this tale, you might smile bitterly. The throne, seemingly eternal, was in truth only a shaky chair, where whoever sat upon it could become a victim at any moment. You are still here, listening to the steady hum of the fan, as I carry you further, into the years after Edward VI, the sickly son of Henry VIII, left the world. That was when Henry's 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, each took the crown in turn. These half-sisters turned the Tudor dynasty into a vast theatre where old wounds never healed. Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, spent her childhood in humiliation. When Henry VIII annulled his marriage to Catherine, Mary was stripped from princess to bastard. Imagine a child once cherished, suddenly denied her title, even forbidden to see her mother. Mary grew up with scars in her heart, and those scars followed her to the throne. A little-known fact, Mary once had to serve as lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth, her younger half-sister, the daughter of Anne Boleyn. It was an insult she never forgot. Historians still debate, did these memories of humiliation make Mary more brutal once she gained power? Some believe that bitterness drove her down a bloody path, while others argue she was simply following her sincere Catholic faith. Mary ascended the throne in 1553, after Edward's death. At first, the people welcomed her, believing her to be the legitimate princess, daughter of a true queen. But then Mary made a decision that unsettled the realm. She married Philip II of Spain. Imagine it, a nation fearful of Spanish domination, and their queen hands herself to a Spanish prince. To the English, it felt like surrendering the keys of their kingdom. A strange fact, Mary loved Philip deeply, but he never truly loved her back. To him, she was a political pawn. She once believed she was pregnant, but it was a phantom pregnancy, a rare condition in which the body convinces itself it carries a child. The disappointment plunged Mary deeper into tragedy. Mary was determined to return England to Catholicism. She restored papal authority and was ruthless toward any Protestant. More than 280 people were burned at the stake during her 5-year reign. Smoke from the pyres filled the squares, and Mary was branded with the infamous name Bloody Mary. Official record among the most famous victims was Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, who had presided over the annulment of Henry and Catherine's marriage. Mary put him on trial and forced him to recant. At first, he signed a paper renouncing his faith, but at the stake, he thrust forward the very hand that had signed and cried, "Burn this unworthy hand first." Before the flames consumed him, historians still debate, did Mary act out of bloodlust or out of fanatical devotion? She truly believed she was saving souls by burning bodies. To her, earthly suffering was temporary, salvation eternal. But the people remembered only the fire and the screams. Mary died in 1558, at the age of 42, sick and alone. Philip, the husband she adored, was not at her side. Her death opened the way for Elizabeth, the half-sister she had despised, to claim the throne. The people sighed in relief, as though waking from a nightmare. A curious detail on her deathbed: Mary still whispered Philip's name to posterity. It was proof of a blind love, a love that turned a queen into a tragic figure of ridicule. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, who had been beheaded by Henry VIII. As a child, she too was branded a bastard. But Elizabeth, unlike Mary, learned to hide her feelings, to observe, and to wait. Official record: Elizabeth was highly educated, spoke many languages, and excelled in rhetoric. It is said she could debate theology with bishops and leave them at a loss for words. A strange fact: Elizabeth feared mirrors. She painted her face thickly to cover wrinkles and the scars of smallpox. In old age, she would hardly let anyone see her true face. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth's intelligence innate, or the result of having to live in constant fear, observing every twist of court politics to protect herself. When she ascended the throne, Elizabeth declared that England would follow its own path, not fully Catholic, not radically Protestant. She created the Church of England with flexibility, maintaining independence from Rome while avoiding deep divisions among her people. A little-known fact: Elizabeth was a master of imagery. She wore gowns embroidered with pearls, symbols of purity, to reinforce her title as the Virgin Queen. Yet many believed she had secret affairs, particularly with Robert Dudley. She never married, knowing that marriage would turn her into a political pawn. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth truly virgin, or was it only political strategy? Some believe she remained chaste for the sake of power. Others argue that, after watching her father execute her mother and several wives, Elizabeth never again trusted marriage. In Elizabeth's time, England entered the Golden Age. Art, Shakespearean drama, explorers like Francis Drake, and victory over the Spanish Armada all turned her into an immortal symbol. Official record: in 1588, the supposedly invincible Armada of Spain sailed to invade England. Elizabeth, clad in silver armor, rode before her troops and declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." Her words inspired the soldiers, and soon after, the English triumphed, stunning all of Europe. A curious fact: Elizabeth rarely ate much. Unlike her father, she lived frugally and had the habit of chewing pearl-powdered lozenges to keep her breath fresh. A small detail, but one that showed the contrast with Henry VIII, who once ate until he vomited, only to eat again. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth truly the ideal queen, or merely a politician skilled at disguise? Some hail her as a political genius. Others argue she was only fortunate to reign during England's rise. Elizabeth died in 1603. At the age of 69, a remarkable lifespan for her era. She passed peacefully, without the blood or stench that haunted her father's death. The people mourned, calling her Gloriana, the glorious queen. You see, though both were children of Henry VIII, Mary left memories of blood and smoke, while Elizabeth became a golden icon. Two sisters, two destinies, yet both reflecting the shadow of a father who had turned love and marriage into political weapons. Thus, after Henry VIII, the throne did not pass to a hero, but into the hands of a frail boy, a bloody queen, and a clever queen. History seemed to balance itself. Bloody Mary reminded us that power can turn love into hatred, while Elizabeth proved that intellect and patience can turn a reign into legend. And you, lying still as you listen to this story, may smile. Power is fleeting, but how one wields it through blood, or through wisdom, is what truly decides how their name will be remembered. Now, relax your shoulders, close your eyes, and let me take you to the final chapter of this long tale, as a lullaby, closing the journey of blood, tears, and fleeting glory in the Tudor dynasty. The story began with Henry VIII, the Golden Prince, praised across Europe. But time, ambition, and a fateful fall transformed him into a bloated, ulceriden tyrant, feared even by his own court. Six mariages, countless executions, tens of thousands of lives consumed by one man's wrath. After his death, the throne passed to his three fragile children: Edward, the sickly boy who reigned for only a few years; Mary, the daughter cast aside, who became Bloody Mary; and Elizabeth, the girl once cursed, who ended as a radiant icon. Do you see it? In each child flickered Henry's shadow, Mary's bitterness, Edward's weakness, Elizabeth's cold intelligence. History smiles bitterly whether they wish it or not. Children bear the legacy of their father. Mary I turned childhood scars into flames upon the pyre. More than 280 burned alive, leaving her forever branded Bloody Mary. Elizabeth chose another path, never marrying, never becoming a pawn, and instead using intellect and patience to build a golden age. One sowed blood, the other light, yet both were shaped by wounds left by Henry VIII. Historians still debate if Henry VIII had not annulled, not executed, not left chaos. Would England have needed a virgin queen to save it? Some believe his brutality paved the way for Elizabeth's brilliance. Evil, in a cruel irony, gave birth to light. Think of it. Henry had everything: power, wealth, women, victories. But in the end, he was only a rotting corpse leaking through a cracked coffin. Mary had a crown, but died lonely and cursed. Edward never had the chance to grow into a man. Only Elizabeth, with patience and wit, died beloved, leaving a legacy of splendor. So what's the lesson here? Power cannot save anyone from loneliness. Gold cannot mask the stench of death. And love, when turned into politics, leaves only blood and tears. Now, breathe in deeply and exhale slowly. Imagine yourself walking through an empty Tudor hall. Candles burn low. Shadows stretch long across the stone walls. Above, the tapestry of the Tudor lion stirs faintly, but there is no laughter. No music. Only you, walking slowly. Your footsteps echoing. You pass. Henry, bloated face, stern eyes. Mary, haunted gaze, hiding tears. Edward, fragile, boyish features. And finally Elizabeth, bright eyes, a faint smile, whispering power does not last, but wisdom endures. Let these faces fade, dissolve into mist. Let the tale close like a book, its echoes lingering, while you drift gently into calm. My friend, now you may close your eyes, letting Henry, Mary, Edward, and Elizabeth become only distant dreams. All the blood, fire, and power now silent. What remains is the steady hum of the fan, your soft breath, and the sleep awaiting you. Sleep well.